Sunday morning Kailul. RAB Yosef Engel leads us to where no one has gone before. The Shiva is dedicated to the memory of Nebuch, a fallen soldier, Shneur Zalman ben Yibodel Chaim Tovim, Chayim Zev. Hakkohen.
Wow.
Hashem Yinkum Domai. RAB Yosef Engel takes us to a place where no one has gone before. RAB Yosef Engel has got to be one of the greatest scholars. In the 1800s, he passes away in 1919, the end of the year. It happens to be his yard site was yesterday, but that's not the reason. It just punkt that's hashgacha pratis. He has an unbelievable theory that he posits about this week's parsha. However, in order to appreciate the journey he's going to take, a number of introductions are in order. One of the old questions that have been discussed is, the Torah was given in the year 2448 or 49, there's a debate, but usually we say 2448. And that's when we assume the Yidden became a nation. In fact, all the laws of Gedim for future generations, to become a ger, one needs circumcision, mikveh, a carbon, if there's a Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara says in Krisis, we learned that we have to follow the same procedure that our Zaydas followed through. When they stood by Mount Sinai, there was Milah when they left Egypt, and there was mikveh, and there was a carbon. So the Gemara is pretty clearly attesting to the fact that all the Yidden went through a gerus. All of the Yidden became converts when we stood at the foot of Har Sinai. Until then, what were we? So presumably we were Bnei Noach like everybody else. But we were the Abrahamic tribe. So we were elevated amongst the others. Avram Avinu had been chosen. B'charta ba'Avram, the Eibishter was boicher in Avram. And the Eibishter gave Avram an extra mitzvah of Milah, and his children, descendants, had to fulfill that. But we could have just been another nation like all the rest with certain highlights. And maybe when we stood at the foot of Har Sinai, everything changed. That's when we began to have the status of a Jew. Or maybe not. Maybe the status of a Jew already began from the times of Avraham. Maybe Avram Avinu was the first Jew. And when we all stood at Har Sinai, something beautiful happened, but it's not that we became Jews, we were always Jews. Maybe another layer of identity was added upon us. And this is an old question that has been discussed. Rabbi Yehuda Rosenis, who was a Gaon in Turkey, he passed away in 1727, so we're almost coming 300 years. You have a relative in Turkey, right?
How are not all of them descendants even then, according to that opinion?
It was because Ki b'Yitzchak Yikara l'Chazara. It was only Yitzchak that was chosen. Yishmael would have. Okay, all right, fine. Anyhow, so this is something. So Rabbi Yehuda Rosen is the great Gaon in Turkey. They say the Baal Shem Tov met him when the Baal Shem Tov wanted to travel to Eretz Yisrael. The Baal Shem Tov wanted to travel to Israel a couple of times. If he did in fact meet the Mishnah Lamelech, it means the Baal Shem Tov traveled to Israel before he even revealed himself. Because the Baal Shem Tov was born in 1698. He only reveals himself at the age of 36. That takes us to 1734. 7 years before then, the Mishnah Melech was Nistalik. You would have to say the Baal Shem Tov wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael years before he even revealed himself. Either way, the Mishnah Lamelech, when he passed away, his house was ransacked, things by thieves. And one of his students, Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, the famous Ma'am lawyers, went into the house of his Rebbe, and he saw that the place is in complete disarray. And he looked around and he found many manuscripts of his Rebbe. So Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, he made a seder out of these manuscripts. And he put together the whole Mishnah Lamelech on the Rambam. And he also found manuscripts of his Rebbe, the Mishnah Lamelech, Pulpulim in Tanakh. Real analysis, sharp, interesting, sometimes cute as well, analysis and stories of Tanakh. And he put it together and it was published as Parashas Drachim. And anyhow, a nice chunk of Parashas Drachim, the Mishnah Noch discusses this very question. When did the halachic identity of the Jew begin? Rabbi Yosef Engel, and in the Shiur, I guess we'll have a little chunk discussing his biography, but Rabbi Yosef Engel wrote many works, most we don't even have today. We do have a nice chunk, and one of the Sfarim that we have today is his Beis HaOitzel's encyclopedia. Now this encyclopedia is not a regular encyclopedia. You're cultivating, you're collecting information from the past on this, on that. Rabbi Yosef Engel, he has encyclopedia, so he has paragraphs and pages, and hundreds of pages on ideas starting with the letter Aleph. But these are all his ideas that he's exploring. He'll mention a musig from Gemara, but he's not just going to quote what the Gemara says and what the Rambam paskins. No. It's not that type of encyclopedia. He's going to explore and analyze new ideas and develop. We only have letter Aleph and part of letter Beis. Apparently he wrote the whole thing, but most of it was lost in the Holocaust. There are shmuas that some of it remains by people who do not want to give it to the public, for whatever reason. But he has the first 30 pages, and I'm talking about 30 pages of tiny letters, okay? So in today's things come like 150 pages, right? When they reprint everything bigger and bigger and bigger. You know what they say, you better learn Shas soon, because soon it's going to be too big to learn. They keep on reprinting bigger and bigger. Shas used to be like this, now it's like, I'll move over. Now it's not, you better learn Shas soon, because soon it's going to be out of your reach. So, and Rabbi Yosef Engel just has on Avos, that's the chapter is about the fathers, pages and pages and pages. And the Rebbe frequently quotes from this Sefer Beis HaOitzer, also from the Parashas Drachim, about the very question that we put on the table before. When did the halachic identity of the Jew begin? And we once had a shiur about it, about if Binyamin would have stolen the cup, would he have been tried like a goy gets killed for stealing, a Jew just has to pay back. Well, the Shvatim, if they would steal, how would they be judged? Like a Ben Noach or like a Yid? And I'm not going to repeat that, okay? As much as I would like to, I'm not going to repeat that. Today we're going to see something else entirely. But as way of introduction, I would like to say, this whole discussion of what was going on from Avraham's times until we stood by Har Sinai can be divided into 4 categories, okay? And each one can be their own shit, 4 categories. Number 1 is what we mentioned. When did the halachic status of a Jew begin? Being a Jew, you have responsibilities, but you have perks. For example, if you steal, you don't get killed. If you eat Avrim min Achai, a Jew gets Malkus. A Ben Noach has 7 mitzvahs. If he violates one of them, Azaros and Zui Misas, and anything he can't do is a capital crime. So a Yid, Avrim min Achai, Malkus. So there's a perk. So when did these perks begin? When did the halachic identity of a Jew begin? That's one issue. That's one question. That's what you mentioned before. Another question would be, B'chlal did the Avos keep Torah? It's a separate question. Whether they had the halachic identity of the Jew or the halachic identity of a guy, the fact is the Gemara attests Avraham Avinu kept the entire Torah, whatever he could, before it was given. Was he the only one? What about Yitzchak? What about Yaakov? The Ramah writes in a letter, Yaakov didn't keep the whole Torah. He married 2 sisters. The Ramah says in Gemara twice, in Kedushin and in Yom, it says Avraham. It doesn't say Yitzchak and Yaakov. It wasn't Yaakov. Really? Amram married his aunt, his father's sister. Yocheved was his father's sister. So there's a big discussion who in fact kept the Torah and how much did they keep. Avram kept the entire Torah. That's what the Gemara, even 8 of Tavshilin, right? Well, if Yaakov kept the whole Torah, then, there was a Reform fellow who once said, then that means Yaakov wrote a Sefer Torah. Then he would have known where Yosef was. It says in the Sefer Torah. So why was he distressed? So the Rashba famously writes in a letter that you got to be reasonable. When it says the Avos kept the whole Torah, it means spiritually. It doesn't mean physically the way Right? Even Yaakovs tefillin, he used sticks, right? So somehow they would have fulfilled the mitzvah of having a Torah, but not in a way that they would have seen all the stories, obviously. So that's a whole discussion on its own. Who kept Torah? What did they keep? Tosfos famously says in his Chidushim on Chumash and Das Kainim, before the Torah was given, you could pick and choose. From Avram until the Torah was given, you could pick and choose. This mitzvah rubs you the right way, fulfill. That mitzvah you don't have patience for, don't worry about it. They picked and choose. This, yeah, that, no. So that's discussion number 2. Who kept Torah and what did they keep? Discussion number 3 is, even if the halachic status of a Jew began when we stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, and until then we were halachically goyim, but maybe we still had the neshama of a Yid. And the Brisker Rav wants to use this to explain how Avram would have kept Shabbos. The Gemara says a goy can't keep Shabbos. A goy that keeps Shabbos is chayiv misa, right? And the Gemara learned it from a pasuk in Noach, Yoim v'laylo lo yishbois, day and night. And we also had a whole shiur about this. You can't. So how? If Avram had the halachic status of a goy, so everyone asks, so he wants to be machmir and keep mitzvahs, one thing. But he can't be machmir and keep something that is not allowed as a ben Noach. So how did he keep Shabbos? What? No, we learned from Noach. Yom v'laylo lo yishbois. So it came then. It was already in existence. By Torah, when it comes to learning Torah, it says Torah tziva lanu Moshe. It's a Marashi belongs to us. Goyim can't learn. That may be only applied when that pasuk was said in Parshas V'zois Habrachim. But when it comes to not keeping Shabbos from Parshas Noach. So this is a major, major discussion. So the Brisker Rav wants to say, based on a Rambam, the issue is only if a goy wants to keep Shabbos, he's trying to create a new religion. But if someone has the identity of a Jew, then he's not stealing anything. You know, you're keeping Shabbos, it does belong to you. You weren't commanded, but since you have the identity in the neshama of a Yid, the whole issue wouldn't apply. So this is a third inyan. That even if you have the halachic status of a goy till the Torah was given, maybe they had the identity of a Jew. It makes a big difference in hashkafa, but it would make a difference also about keeping Shabbos. The fourth subject is really today's discussion. And that is, when was the Torah given? So you're looking at me, what? You just said, when we stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, 2448 or 2449, it was either the 6th day of Sivan, like the Chachamim, or Rabbi Yossi, it was the 7th day of Sivan. The Gemara says it was Shabbos, fine. The Pirkei de Rabbi says it was a Friday. But whenever that day was, when we stood at the foot of Har Sinai, that's when Matan Torah was. And everything that happened until then was just preparatory. You know, we do say that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were really just paving the way for Moshe. Moshe was the greatest Navi, right? The Rambam, it's one of the 13 principles of faith to believe that Moshe is the greatest Navi, both compared to those before him and those after. On the other hand, the Eibishter told Moshe about respecting Avraham, b'mekayim gedolim al tamid. Don't remember Avraham Avinu. Avraham was the first guy. But yeah, you could imagine the others were really paving the way for Moshe Rabbeinu. So was it just preparatory? Was it just preparation? What about the fact that there are certain... There's a famous statement of the Rambam. Okay, I'll start with this. Famous statement of the Rambam. Okay, we know this because either we learn Pirush HaMishnayos from Masechta Chulin, or the Rebbe quotes it all the time. The Rambam is discussing a Mishnah in Masechta Chulin. In fact, I have it on the page, number 2. It's a Mishnah Masechta Chulin, Daf Kuf. It's talking about the Gid Hanashe. In Parshas Vayishlach, you have the story of the Gid Hanashe. Noyeg b'tahira. Noyeg b'tahira. It only applies by a kosher animal, according to the Chachamim. Ein noyeg b'tmei. We're reading number 2. If you're eating a treifa animal, you'll get malchus for eating a treifa animal. You won't also get whipped for eating the Gid Hanashe, that part of the animal, if it's treif. Rabbi Yehuda Omer no. Rabbi Yehuda says af b'tmeya. It applies both by a kosher animal and by a treif animal. Omer Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, I'll prove it to you. V'haloi mibnei Yaakov neser Gid Hanashe. When did Gid Hanashe become forbidden for Jews? In Parashat Vayishlach, after the fight, it says, Al Kain, therefore, lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael Gid Hanashe. So did it start then? It said the words b'nei Yisrael. Well, Yaakov is Yisrael, so maybe it's Yaakov's kids. Won't eat the... So it began, it could be, Bris Milah began by Avraham, maybe Gid Hanashe began earlier. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, it did. And he says, Va'adayin, at that point, Behemoth Tameya Muteris Lahen. The Shvatim were definitely allowed to eat treif. I mentioned before there's a discussion if they chose to keep Torah, fine, but they definitely didn't have to. Nobody says that the Shvatim had to keep kosher. Which means to them, a treif animal and kosher were all in the same boat. So when they were told not to eat Gid Hanashe, it would apply to everything. Why would a kosher animal be selected instead? To them, they're all the same. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's raya. Amru Lois, the Chum said Rabbi Yehuda, you got it wrong. Gid Hanashe became assur in 2448. B'Sinai Neser, it only became assur when we stood at the foot of Har Sinai. Ela shenichtav b'mkayim, when Moshe wrote it, he put in Parshas Vayishlach. When it says in Vayishlach, Al Kain lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael, it means, when are the Yidden called b'nei Yisrael? When we became a nation. When we became a nation. So and at that point, kosher animals are different than treif animals. So it only applies to a kosher animal. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it started in Vayishlach, and at that point all animals were the same, it applies across the board. The Rambam in his commentary there famously writes, it's not a long piece, the Rambam says we go like the Chachamim, which means even though it's written in Parshas Vayishlach, it became assur at Har Sinai. And the, what?
The brothers complained to Yaakovs that Yosef was doing certain averos.
Yosef complained to his father the brothers were doing averos. Avim and Achai. Yeah, because a guy can't do Avim and Achai. There were three things. One of them was calling the Bnei Ashvachas Avodim. The other one was that they were hanging around strange women, so that's Gili Arayas. Yeah, well...
But the Rebbe says they kept it.
Well, it's Machlokes if Yehuda remained with Tamar or not. Machlokes. Fine.
But the
so
Rebbe were positive that they kept it.
there's 2 days. He's explaining that opinion. There's 2 days though. Fine. So the Rambam writes like this. The Rambam says, this is a major foundation to hold on and never let go. The Rambam says, anything we do today is because Hashem told Moshe on Har Sinai. It says in Chumash Pru Revu twice in Bereshis and Noach. That's not the reason we have kids today. Is not because God told Adam or God told Noach. It's because in Har Sinai Hashem reiterated to Moshe, even though it's not written again later in the Chumash. Pru Revu is not written again later in the Chumash. Nonetheless, it's a given that the Eibishter reiterated it to Moshe and Har Sinai, and that's why we do it. The Rambam says better. Bris Milah. In Parashat Lecho, you have psukim and psukim about Bris Milah. Says the Rambam, we don't give bris because Hashem told Avram. It's because on Har Sinai the Eibishter reiterated it. And Taka comes again in Parashas Tazria, the pasuk of Ubiyom Hashmini Yimel B'Sar Elos, it's Taka there. But the Eibishter reiterated, that's why we do it. That happens to be by the bris. There's a lumdus that why we do it is because God told Moshe. But what we're doing is we're still entering the bris of Avram. That's how you make that's what we're doing. We're entering the bris of Avram. Why we do it is because on that mountain of Har Sinai, the Eibishter told Moshe again. And the Rambam says so too Gid Hanashe. Now by Gid Hanashe, it's not a big deal. The Chacham hold that the prohibition only began by Har Sinai. You see, by Bris Milah, we Taka did it before, and now there's a Chiddush. After Har Sinai, we do it for a new reason. The Rambam says so too Gid Hanashe. Now by Gid Hanashe, it's not really a Chiddush. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you would have to say that Chiddush, that even though they were careful for generations, now we do it because God told Moshe. According to the Chachamim, it didn't apply before Matan Torah. So of course we only do it, Hashem told Moshe. There is no other reason to do it. We never did it before. But Akaponim, this is the Rambam. So the Rambam famously says that anything we do today is because God told Moshe and Har Sinai. Even if the mitzvah doesn't appear again later, like Pru Revu, it's a given Hashem told Moshe. Or another one, you have many mitzvahs that come in Parshas Boy. that don't come again later in Chumash. But Erev Toichlu Matzahs. The mitzvah to eat matzah the night of the 15th was written in Parshas Boy. It's not written again. That mitzvah, the first night you have to eat matzah. So the Rambam either would say that a little while later by Har Sinai the Eibishter reiterated to Moshe. Or maybe the Rambam might say that Parshas Boy is already the beginning of Matan Torah. There is a svara that we'll see that it could be the Eibishter told Moshe, but leaving Egypt is on the way to come to this mountain, Tabnus Elakim on this mountain. So maybe the mitzvah of Parshas Boy is considered already the beginning of Matan Torah. Or maybe not. Maybe the Eibishter would have to because here it's the same Moshe, the same Eibishter. It's the location. It's Egypt instead of outside Egypt, or instead of Mount Sinai. But that's a discussion. But this is a fundamental rule the Rambam places on the table. So if you're learning Chumash and you find a mitzvah before Parshas Yisro, and you find a mitzvah that's not written again later, right? You're allowed to learn the mitzvah from there. You're allowed to say, I see from here there's a command. But you should know the reason we do it today is because God told Moshe in Har Sinai. Look at number 1. This is a pivotal Gemara for this whole discussion. You have to have in mind. In fact, the Rambam holds, for example, by a goy, if a goy keeps the 7 mitzvahs b'nei noyach, they don't automatically become a ger toshev, which gives them all the rights of living in Israel. It's only if they keep the Zion mitzvahs because God said to Moshe they have to keep them. If a goy doesn't know this Pirush HaMishnais, if a goy keeps the Zion mitzvahs because nothing to do with Moshe, then it could be he's not Chassidei Yisrael, doesn't receive the category of a ger toshev. Fine. Look at number 1. A Gemara in Sanhedrin. Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. Any mitzvah that was said to Bnei Noach and was repeated by Sinai, lozeh v'lozeh nemra. Any mitzvah that's found twice in Chumash, for example, not to kill in Parshas Noach, it says whoever spills the blood of man, dama yishafach, right? And then you have an asur sadibris lo yisirtzach. If it's written twice in the Chumash, lozeh v'lozeh nemra, it applies to the Yid, it applies to the Bnei Noach. But L'Bnei Noach, if it was told before Har Sinai, v'loi nishnit, that wasn't repeated. What if you find a mitzvah that's only there earlier in Chumash and doesn't come up again later? So it doesn't apply to both Yidden and Gentiles because you only have one command. Who's it going to apply to? So your gut might say maybe it should only apply to Goyim. If it was only said before Parshas Yisro, never repeated, maybe it only applies to Goyim. But the Gemara says ridiculous. How could the Goyim have a mitzvah the Yidden don't have? So you have to flip it. It only applies to the Jew. L'Yisrael nemer, to the Yid it said, v'loi l'bnei noach, not to Goyim. So if the mitzvah is written twice, earlier in Chumash and after Yisro, one for the Goyim, one for the Jew. If it's only written after, obviously that's just for the Jew. If it's only written before and not after, so you only have one command, you can only apply it to either the Yid or the Goy. Logic says you apply it to the Yid. And then he says, Va'anu ein lanu, the only example I have is Gid Hanashe. It's written once in the Chumash. It was written before Yisro, not again. And it applies to the Yid and Valib according to Rabbi Yehuda. Because according to the Chachamim, it never really applied before Har Sinai. It was just written there because of the story. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, what? He's talking about a loisas, a prohibition. Right, prohibition. Which means, what do you see from there? If you find in Chumash a mitzvah in the earlier parts of Chumash, you're allowed to say, I found a mitzvah, and you apply it to the Jew. The Rambam says, no, everything was cancelled out by Har Sinai. What that means is, anything we do because Hashem told Moshe and Har Sinai, but you're allowed to find a mitzvah in the earlier parashiyos, and if it's only there, it only applies to the Jew. The Rambam not arguing with this Gemara, but he's saying the reason why we do it now is because the Eibishter reiterated it by Har Sinai, even though you don't find the Chumash testifying to the fact it was reiterated. It's a given. Fine. Okay, so where are we going with this? So it seems pretty clear so far that if you find a mitzvah written before Parshas Yisro, you could latch onto it and use it as a source to obligate an action or prohibition. But the reason we're doing it today is because the Eibusha told it to Moshe and Har Sinai. Fine. But there are okay, hold on. We don't like to talk about Avelus. But there's an idea of someone sitting Avelus, so there's Shiva, there are 7 days. 7 days of Avelus. The Gemara wants to know, the Bavli and Yerushalmi, they all want to know, what's the source of sitting 7 days Shiva? What's the source? So the Yerushalmi says, what do you mean? It's a pasuk in Vayechi, after Yaakov passed away, they sat Avelus for his father, Yosef had Avelus for his father 7 days.
Doesn't that stem from before Noah's, because Methuselah, the Eibishter waited 7 days for them?
Yeah, but that you can't learn halacha from a medrash. Ein l'meid in medivrei agoda. Also, the Eibishter said Shiva, fine. That doesn't mean we have to sit Shiva. Or it just means that during Shiva you can't bring a mabel on the world. But so, but yeah, good point. So the Yerushalmi says, V'chila meidin, are you allowed to learn from Koydem Matan Torah? The Yerushalmi says what? Are you allowed to learn a halacha from something that happened before the Torah was given? That's what Yerushalmi says. Tosfos in Masechta Moed Katan understands that to mean that the Yerushalmi says you can't learn from before Matan Torah, you can't. And therefore, according to most Rishonim, Avelus, the 7 days of Avelus is not biblical. It's rabbinic. The Rif, the Rambam, the Rosh, the three big guns, Rabbi Yosef Kari bases halachas on, they believe it's the Rabbanon. The Shaila is the first day. The Rif and the Rambam might hold the first day is biblical, and even then it could be only if the day of the passing is the same day as the burial. And then after the burial you have biblical Avelus. But the rest of the 6 days is rabbinic. The Rosh holds the whole thing is rabbinic. The pasuk in Vayechi that they sat 7 days, it's a clear pasuk. Well, the Yerushalmi says you can't learn from before Matan Torah. Adinus is different. Adinus is different halachas. The Rif happens to say that there are some Gaonim before his times who held all 7 days of Avelus are biblical. They learned when the Yerushalmi says V'chila meidin, can you learn from before Matan Torah? It doesn't mean can you learn. It's you can learn. V'chila meidin, you're able to learn. They read it differently. They read it b'nei softly. Not can you. You can, right? It's all about how you sing it. It's all about how you sing it. It's all about the trop, right? Where's the balkar? It's all about the trop. It's all about how you sing it. You can. So automatically, wait, okay, fine. But the fact is, most Rishonim learn the Yerushalmi not like that you can't learn from before Matan Torah. Really? So how do you look at Pru Revu and make a mitzvah out of it? What happened to the Gemara number 1? Yeah, or the Gemara number 1 says anything that was written before Har Sinai Fakeret, you're able to learn from there. So you say, no, that's when it's a mitzvah. That's when God said it as a command. The Yerushalmi is talking about, you want to look at a story. You want to look at a story from before Parshas Yisro and start learning halacha, that you can't do. If the Eibush has said it as a tzivui, you can. And the Maharatz Chayes, Rabbi Tzvi Hersh Chius, who was one of the big Gaonim in the early 1800s, in his time he was considered a little bit out there. He was even got a degree and he was many of his comments on Gemara are professor academic style, lots of the history, very interesting. But he writes that he says you for sure have to make this distinction. Anything said before Matan Torah in a way of a command you could learn from. It's anything written in a way of stories. Now, usually throughout Chumash you're allowed to learn from a story. For that we say if the story is before Matan Torah you can't learn from. There's a story the brother Shvatim sat Shiva for Yaakov, you can't learn from there. But a command you'll be able to learn. Fine? So that's... But hold on. There are many things we do learn from before Matan Torah. Zrizin makdim in the mitzvahs, right? You got to get up and do a mitzvah right away. We learn from Avraham Avinu. Vayash Avraham woke up early. So you're supposed to do bris milah, the whole 8th day is kosher, but do it earlier on.
That's a halacha.
Zrizin makdim in the mitzvahs? It's a halacha? Sure. Unless you have a strong reason. You say, why didn't I follow it? Because I had a strong reason to do it later in the day. And we once gave a shiur years ago about the big controversy in Lublin with Reb Leibel Eger and Reb Yeshua Heschel Ashkenazi about that. Fine. But yeah, otherwise it's reason makdim and you're meant to do it right away. Other considerations can be doicha perhaps, but yeah, what do you mean? You're learning from a story? Avram woke up early? Irrelevant. Rashi writes in Parshas Chayesar that Lavan and the mother say about Rivka, let's call the Naira, Nishales Pia, let's ask Rivka if she wants to get married. Rashi says from here you learn you can't marry a woman unless she agrees. You're learning halacha from a story? That's mamish learning halacha from a story. Lavan swindles Yankiv. Yankiv, before he knows, is married to Leah, right? And he said, so he works out with Lavan, all right, I'll work another 7 years for Rachel. What does Lavan say? You can't get married tomorrow. Male Shavua Zois, finish the week of Sheva, finish 1 week of celebration with Leah. Then you marry Rachel and work another 7 years. We learn out from there, Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. That's the source of a halacha that you can't mix one simcha with the other. Ein Ma'arvin Simcha, you can't mix one joy with another joy. You're learning from a story, from Lavan. Forget about a story, it's a word that Lavan said. It's before Matan Torah and it's Lavan, right? So you find all these cases.
It's not in the 613, any of these things.
They're halachas though, fine. No, but okay, so Avelis would have been one of the 613. Now, if Avelis, the first day is Deraisa, you have to count it.
It's not in the 613.
No, it could be you'd have to count it. The Rosh Taka hold is completely Derabanan, it's not there. It's one of the 7 mitzvahs Derabanan. If you hold Avelis is Deraisa.
The Rambam lists it.
We'll check it up in Hilchos Avos. So, could you bring a Sefer Shoftim? Bring a Sefer Shoftim from the library. So, but the Yerushalmi says Ein Lameidin, you can't learn from before Matan Torah. It sounds like you can't learn halacha, not just you can't. So you're allowed to learn everything, you just can't make a new mitzvah out of it. So you have all these examples of so approval was given as a mitzvah. Now that we said. The Reb Hersh Chaya says anything was given as a mitzvah, as a shoneh, is different. But, so what do you do with this? So you have a number of answers. First of all, the kafter v'ferach, Rabbi Shturi Aparchi. Rabbi Shturi Aparchi was one of the big voyagers. He was a student of the Rosh, but then he traveled very far. He traveled to Eretz Yisrael, he traveled long distances, and he really wanted to work out the map of Israel. Exactly the borders, east, west, north, and south for all the mitzvahs, which apply in Israel, which apply Ever L'Yarden. He really wanted to work. He wrote a sefer, Kafter V'Ferach. And in the beginning, the first parak, he talks about these things that the Avos did before the Torah was given. And the Kafter V'Ferach says like this: you can't learn a new idea from before Matan Torah, but you're allowed to learn how to do something. You could learn how to fulfill something, but not the idea itself. So you can't create Avelus from before Matan Torah. But Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, that's just activities. You're trying to figure out how to act, that you could learn. Zrizim Makdim L'Mitzvah is not, you're not learning a specific mitzvah, it's an attitude to have. That you could learn. That's his take, the Kafta V'Ferach's take. You can't learn the essence of the idea, new idea, Chiddush. But how to act, how to deal with things you know from elsewhere, that the oifanim, the way to fulfill, you could learn. That's his take. The Shavus Yankov, Rabbi Yankov Reisher, one of the great Geonim, 300 years ago, plus, great Geonim in Poland, wrote many Svarim. So he believes like this, that anything that happened before Matan Torah, which is logical, you're allowed to extrapolate from. You find sitting 7 days Shiva is, why 7 days? Why not 3? Why not 10? Why not 20? There's no logic to 7, so you can't learn from there. Zrizin Makdim and the mitzvahs is logical. You want to show the Eibishter that the mitzvah is precious to you, so you wake up early. You don't mix one simcha with the other, or you don't marry a woman unless she wants. Logical things, anything which is logical, you could learn from. But anything which is just azoi because You can't. Yeah, so these are some of the theories of how you explain what we do learn, what we don't learn. Okay, now we can start the shiur. Comes Rabbi Yosef Engel. So Rabbi Yosef Engel is born in Tarnow. He's born in the end of the 1850s. And his parents were apparently Tzanzer Chassidim from the Divrei Chaim. Yeah, we're gonna get there. When we get to Vienna, we're gonna stick it in. Don't worry, we're gonna get there. And the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz, right? The great Gaon, Reb Chaim Tzanzer. So, and apparently, Rabbi Yosef Engel, when he was young, he was taken. Parents, his mother would have took him to Reb Chaim Tzanzer. And apparently, later on, he became a student of the Avnei Nezer. Rabbi Yosef Engel would travel to the Avnei, who was only slightly older than him. So Rabbi Yosef Engel was a Chassidisher. He was. And we're actually very proud to list him amongst the Chassidische Gaonim. In that generation, there was no shortage of Gaonim throughout the world, in Chassidish and Litvish. In the end of the 1800s, I mean, you had, he's about the same age as the Rogatchover. You have Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Meir Arik, apparently the great Gaon, was apparently a friend of Rabbi Yosef Engel. Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin was alive. And so the list just goes on and on. And Rabbi Yosef Engel was a Chassidisher. And throughout his Sfarim, sometimes he quotes ideas of the Baal Shem Tov to explain. He has Kabbalah, and it's incredible. Whenever you learn something from Rabbi Yosef Engel, he's taking you on a trip through all parts of it. So you have no idea what's coming next. It could be a random Tosis. It could be he loves the Maharal. Big on the Maharal's everywhere. But he'll find, it's not only he had entire Torah's fingertips, he was able to deduce from a random explanation of the Maharal and a random Rashi to create a whole halachic idea, which, you know, even if you would have learned the Maharal, you wouldn't have put it together. But after he does it, he writes so beautifully, so clearly, he convinces you. It becomes so clear. The Rebbe once at a Farbrengen, it was in 1976, in end of Pesach, discussed that how come people, why isn't there more discussion about the similarity of the Rogatchover's way of learning and Rabbi Yosef Engel's way of learning? Rabbi Yosef and the Rebbe said there's a bit of a difference. The Rogatchover is very cryptic. Rabbi Yosef Engel is barichas, a beautiful pen. He writes and writes. He holds you by the hand. He quotes the Gemara, and then he deduces what he's trying to deduce, and it's just and he takes you through it. It's so clear. And the Rebbe
was like never learned Cohen.
He learned. He just doesn't quote them. We have lots of testimony that we have. In fact, there was a book printed recently where there's pages and pages of testimony that he learned Achronim. He doesn't quote them.
He never said ayin teni Cohen.
He doesn't write it. It's true, but he learned it himself when he was younger.
Questions, and he wouldn't say ayin Bekiva or something like that.
He wouldn't say it, fine, but doesn't mean he didn't learn it when he was younger.
His own answers.
There's pages and pages of lots of people giving edus that he learned Achronim. I have the book. Anyhow, either way. But the Rebbe said, however, the Rogatchover, the Chidushim are greater. There's more Chidushim, there's more. Rabbi Yosef Engel isn't as great, and it's hard to know exactly what the Rebbe is saying, but as close as they are, there's still difference. Rogatchover was, there was a league of his own, right under him, Rabbi Yosef Engel. And they say that when the Rogatchover would give shiur, he spoke so clearly. They say even the walls would understand. When the Rogatchover gave a shiur, it was so clear, elaborate. Although one person says that was only for the first part of the shiur. At some point, he just started going fast forward, times 3. But at least the beginning of the shiur was beautiful. But the Rogatchover's writing, very cryptic. It's hard to decipher. Apparently, by Rabbi Yosef Engel was fakert. When he spoke terse and cryptic. But when he wrote, he has all the patience in the world. And Rabbi Yosef Engel ultimately becomes a Rav in Krakow. He's there for a number of years, till the First World War. When he came to Krakow, he was invited to be a dayan on the Bezdin. And during one of the first deliberations, he speaks, and the head of the Bezdin realized that this guy needs to be at the main seat. So immediately, Rabbi Yosef Engel was appointed as the head dayan of the city of Krakow, the chief rabbi of Krakow. The Av Bezdin Although he suffered from balabatim, some disgruntled balabatim gave him a hard time. Yeah, the Rif spent most of his life in Morocco. At the age of 75, there was a psak din he was involved in, and a balabas was rubbed the wrong way. Informs on the Rif had to run for his life, and that's how he ended up going to Spain. Yeah, the Pnei Yeshua in Frankfurt. Yeah, Rabbanim didn't always have it easy. So there's actually an article that was published where someone in Krakow complains about Yosef Engel. He says in London the guy is the king, but in worldly affairs, this balabas was disgruntled to say the least. And what are you going to do? Rabbi Yosef Engel wrote a sefer. There are two of his svarim are Shivim Panim LaTorah and Gvuras Shmoinim. Gvuras Shmoinim, he has one question, 80 answers. Shivim Panim LaTorah, one question, 70 answers. And some of these answers are pages long, pulling pages long, and then he gets to another answer. So he had Rabbi Yosef Engel.
Wait, what was the question?
For Gvuras Shmoinim, I'll tell you the question. The question was that there's one Tana who holds that even the owner of a korban could be mafagel the korban. Pigel is if b'shas the shchita or some of the avodas you have in mind to eat it at the wrong time, it invalidates the korban. What if the owner, not the Cohen doing the avodah, the owner has that in mind? So one Tana holds it works to disrupt the korban. But then a woman who's a soita has to bring a certain korban, a mincha. Every woman who's a soita will just invalidate the mincha, and then the whole soita procedure will fall apart. That's the question. Yeah, it's a great question. 80 answers. So there was a great Gaon called RAB Engel, the Chebina Gaon, the great Gaon, the Chebina Gaon. The Chebina Gaon was, he had met Rabbi Yosef Engel. The Chebina Gaon himself, he has a whole story. He and the Rebbe had a beautiful relationship. He was older than the Rebbe. He had a beautiful relationship. Yeah, he passed from Eretz Yisrael. But he had some correspondence. The Chebina Gaon, during the Holocaust, he had to flee to Russia. But then the Russians found him and he was a legal immigrant. So they threw him to Siberia for years. He ultimately makes it to Eretz Yisrael. In the 50s, he became very sick and the doctors gave up on him. And his students wrote to the Rebbe, our Rebbe in the early days, asking for a bracha. The Rebbe writes, thank you that I got the news punkt today, because right before I went to the Frierdiker Rebbe, I mentioned his name, and the Rebbe basically promised he's going to get, the Rebbe says, I'm certain that you're going to write to me soon how you've recovered, and boom, miraculously the guy recovers. Incredible. No. The Chebina Gaon.
Oh, okay. What was his name?
Wiedenfeld was his last name. So the Chebina Gaon said about Rabbi Yosef Engel, you think he found the 80 answers to the questions, he called his sefer Gvuras Shmoinim. You think he found 70 answers to the other question, he called it Shivim Panim LaTorah. No. He decided on the name of the sefer, and he found that many answers. If he would have called the Techveis, V'hayayam of Meya Ve'esrim Shon, he would have found 120 answers. That's the type of Gaon Rabbi Yosef Engel was. Rabbi Yosef, when the First World War hit, Rabbi Yosef Engel traveled, he was out of Krakow, and he went to Austria, to Vienna. He was there for a couple of years. And that's when he walked with Rabbi Teitelbaum's father, and Rabbi Yosef Engel, it was Sukkot in 1919. Apparently it was a very cold Sukkot. And he was sitting in the sukkah, and he took ill, very ill. And an illness he never recovered from. He passed away shortly after, on the first day of Chesed.
When was the great pandemic? Was it 1919?
That was 2020.
1919?
Yeah.
Remember where there were millions of people? There was the great pandemic in
Spanish flu. 2020.
Black plague?
No.
not Black Plague.
Fine. Now, this was a personal thing that happened to him on Sukkot that year. And actually, while he was in Vienna, Austria, he was told by some doctors that he would learn the entire day, never stop, that he has to take a break from looking at things inside. So he had to learn Baal Peh. So he told someone that he never realized how much he knew of Bahar. His whole life he learned inside. All of a sudden he realized he knows the whole thing. He knows ganz Shas Baal Peh. He told that I just realized that if all the Sfarim would disappear, I could rewrite the Gemara from beginning to end. He never realized. They say in every 3 months he finished Shas. Anyhow, so Rabbi Yosef Engel is one of the cute stories they say is there was once a Maisa, there was a debate over some two parties over a pile of clothes. One said it's mine, one said a part of it's mine. They come to Rabbi Yosef Engel, and each one has a whole story that this is mine, this is mine. So he says, you know what, I got to think about this, come back tomorrow. That night he threw in some of his own clothes in the pile. The next day they come back, and Rabbi Yosef Engel tells the woman who said the whole thing's hers, no, identify you. She says, it's all mine, it's all mine. And that gave away that... Anyhow, a great, great man. So in his Sefer, Beis HaOtzer, he posits the following theory, okay? And, we're going to basically do this outside because it's already late. Rabbi Yosef Engel wants to say he thinks Matan Torah didn't begin in the year 2448. It began much earlier. Maybe when the Eibishter told Avram to do Bris Milah, that was already Matan Torah. The Rambam we quoted in Chulin, the Rambam's going according to one opinion. There are other opinions. There are many opinions in Torah. And Rabbi Yosef Engel was going to thread through a number of debates between Amoraim and Tanoim for this very idea. Maybe the Torah, the beginning of the Torah began when the Eibishter gave Avram Bris Milah. He's going to say even more. When Hashem told Avram Lech Lecha, that was the beginning of the giving of the Torah. Now where does that come from? So now look at number 3. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, you got to know. Im Naimar, if you're going to say that the Avos already left the category of Bnei Noach, Yesh Leimer, I could say even more. The Haschalas Nesinas HaTorah from Avram, the Torah began to be given by Avram. That was already the beginning of the Torah coming down to planet Earth. But Avram wasn't commanded in everything, only part. Nit Milah Levad. Avram was given Milah, Yankiv was given Gid Hanashe. Like Rabbi Yehuda, we saw in number 2. That's part of Torah. And b'Mitzrayim we were given Pesach. In Morah, which we stopped off between leaving Egypt and getting the Torah, more mitzvahs. Sinai was the completion. It's a whopping idea. It stands completely in the face of the Rambam we mentioned before. Says, I'll prove it to you. He wants to say it depends on the debate of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Now, he's going to say, I'm telling you, you'll be licking your fingers. It's mamish unbelievable ideas he has. Look at number 4, Gemara in Gittin. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Bana. Rabbi Yochanan says the Torah Megillah Nitna was given in portions. What this means is like this. The way most Rishonim learn is like this. The Eibishter told Moshe all the mitzvahs. According to Rabbi Yochanan, anything the Eibishter told Moshe, he wrote down. Meaning like this. When Moshe was in Har Sinai, the Eibishter taught him the Torah. We'll see more about that soon. Then there was the Oyel Moed, the Mishkan, and Moshe would enter the Mishkan in order to speak with God, and the Eibishter would reveal mitzvahs as well. And then Bechlal, throughout the desert, we have stories of the Eibishter revealing new things. Pesach Sheni, the stories of Bnei Tzlafchad. You have times where the Eibishter reveals mitzvahs. According to Rabbi Yochanan, every time Moshe heard something, he went to his tent and wrote it down. The Eibishter told him about mitzvahs tzitzis. He told him the end of Parashat Shlach. The Eibishter told him the words. Moshe went to his tent and he wrote it down. He had a little scroll.
But it was not written till Shvat, till the last month of Moshe.
Okay, let's deal with Dvarim is Dvarim. So Rabbi Yochanan says all of the things were written as separate parchments, and at the end, in the 40th year, Moshe compiled. He tied them all together to make a Torah scroll. Shenemar Ozo Marti, David says, I said, Hine Bossi, I thought I just arrived, but the truth is, B'Megillah Sefer Kosovalai, in the Torah it already spoke about me, which is either talking about the story of the daughters of Lot, which is the ancestors of David, whatever it refers to, but David is referring to part of the Torah as a Megillah. That means each part of Torah was originally a separate scroll. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, no, Torah Chasuma Nitna. Moshe memorized everything God told him for 40 years. And he kept on chazering it to himself. He kept on chazering. Moshe, throughout the 40 years, kept on repeating it to himself. In the 40th year, one fell swoop, he wrote it all down. Torah chasum nitna. As it says, L'koyach es sefer Torah zeis, towards the end of the Chumash, the Torah refers to itself as one book. So the Gemara asks, V'idach nami, what's Rabbi Yochanan going to do with L'koyach? It's one book. Shkoyach, that's after Moshe bound it together. Ahu lebasa de idbek, that's after it was bound. Shkoyach. Now, but what about Reish Lakish? What's he going to do with B'Megillah Sefer Kosovo? I thought it was written in one fell swoop. Reish Lakish says the whole Torah is called a Megillah. The whole Torah is a Megillah, for whatever reason, but not because it was made originally with different scrolls. That's the simple way of learning the Gemara. Yeah, it's a debate. It's a Machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish says Rabbi Yosef Engel. You know what the Gemara means? When it's not talking about how Moshe recorded it. It's talking about how God gave it. Megillah means the Eibusha gave the Torah part by part. He gave a bit to Avram, a little bit to Yaakov, Gid Hanashe, a little bit of Mitzrayim, a little bit by Mar, a little bit in Marsa. Torah Chasuma means in one fell swoop, means like the Rambam writes in Chulim, when we stood at Har Sinai, one fell swoop, the Eibusha gave it all. That's how he wants to learn. Looking back in number 3 in the 4th line, in number 3, this is the Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish in Gittin. If Torah Chasuma Nitna or Megillah, Nitna, and he's teaching according to Rabbi Yochanan who holds Megillah, Nitna Yeshloim, according to Rabbi Yochanan who says it was given in parts, you could say the theory, a bit to Avram, a bit to Yaakov, etc. The Rambam writes in Hilchas Malachim, the Eibishter gave, right, there were 6 mitzvahs to Adam, and then Avram and Achai to Noach, and then Avram got Milah, and then the Rambam actually writes, more mitzvahs were given to Amram, and the Rambam says, V'hashar, or the rest, it was completed when we stood at Har Sinai. And Rabbi Yosef Engel later on actually quotes this Rambam to prove his theory. The Reb in the Sichos, when he speaks about the Rambam in the Chulin, who says it was all given on Har Sinai, nothing before, in the footnotes he says, and yeah, of course, Rabbi Yosef Engel points out from the other Rambam, that no, there's an idea that it was given part by part, it was completed by Har Sinai. So you have to see how those two Rambams fit, but the fact that Rabbi Yosef Engel's onto something, continues Rabbi Yosef Enkel, according to Reish Lakish, that it was chasuminit in one fell swoop, then you can't say it started by Avram. It was given on the 6th of Sivan, 2448. The time he says, what's the logic of Reish Lakish? It seems the Svirale, Torah can't be divided. Lefi madregas achdusa shetanotim bezeh hazeh. Torah is essentially something which is unified. The Gemara says a person shouldn't leave his friend, ela mitoch dvar halacha. You should say a word, because that way you'll remember him. You know what that means? Well, say a joke, you'll also remember with a joke. For who said he'll find the joke funny, you know? Maybe if I can't, maybe he'll remember you forever because of the bad joke. If I can't, the jokes that don't work are usually more memorable, right? Torah is be'etzem something which unifies. It's an entity which is unified itself and some which unifies others. And that's the best way you'll hold on to the memory of your friend. Says Yosef Engel, I see Reish Lakish that the Torah was given in one fell swoop. Because Torah is an entity of unity, it can't be divided. It can't be divided. But Rabbi Yochanan would disagree. In fact, join me in number 5 for a second. Hold on, we'll continue. Join me number 5 for a second. Rabbi Yosef Engel wants to thread this through another debate of Tanoim. There's plukta de Tano. There's a debate of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. Iklalus nemru b'Sinai. Rabbi Yishmael says when Moshe stood on Mount Sinai, he only got the general ideas of each mitzvah. Details were given to him at a later point in the Mishkan, in the Oyel Moed. Rabbi Akiva says no, the general things and the details were given on Har Sinai and repeated later in the Mishkan. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, the debate of if Klalus Nemru b'Sinai and the Protus in Oyel Moed, or maybe like Rabbi Akiva, both the Klal and the Prat were said by Sinai, is Gam Kain, it's the same debate. If the Torah was given Ka'achas or B'zeh Achazeh. According to Rabbi Yishmael, the Torah was given in stages, and Har Sinai was given the Klalim. Later on, the details. Rabbi Akiva says, no, the Torah has to be given ka'achas. On Har Sinai, he got the whole thing. Details and it was repeated in the Oil Moed. He wants to thread that through. By number 6, I found the Drogochover said the exact same thing. Ayin bahach machlokes the chagiga davav, which is debate Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Shmuel. And in a number of places about the Klalus Nemru Bahar Sinai, the general ideas given at Mount Sinai, and the details in Oil Moed. Or do I say even the Pratim on Har Sinai? V'zeh nafkiminu from Har Sinai. Are they dvarim nifradim or akol mitzvah? The Drogochover says, are all the mitzvahs of Torah one unit, or each mitzvah stands alone? For example, can you have the idea that one mitzvah was given as a safeguard for another? If all the mitzvahs are one idea, it's not a problem that one mitzvah should be there to help another. But if each mitzvah is a dover nifred, then you won't be able to have a siyog that one mitzvah is there for another. The Rebbe Rashab writes in a mimer, why is it if you're oisik b'mitzvah, you're potter from a mitzvah? Because all the mitzvahs are one. So when you're doing mitzvah A, hostashon, you already have mitzvah B. You're not avoiding it. When we say you don't have to fulfill this because you have it already. But the Drogochover says that would depend. If the whole Torah is one mitzvah, that's Rabbi Akiva. The klal and the prat was given on Mount Sinai. According to Rabbi Shmuel, no, they're separate. In fact, the Drogochover ties it to a debate in the Tosefta of Sanhedrin of Chachamim and Rab Meir. If you have a student during Shiur, sometimes the student might ask a question non-related. Rab Meir says there's no such thing as non-related. Kol ha-Torah kula inyan echad. So anything, it's always considered me'inyan le'inyan ba'isa inyan. It's one thing to another, but all under the same umbrella. Chacham say no, a student has no right to ask a random question. Says the Drogochover, it's the same debate. The Drogochover said it's another debate in Chulin. If someone's a mummer, if someone is cast out a certain aveira, is he kosher for all the other 612, or once he's a mummer to one mitzvah, is a mummer l'cholat? It's a debate. The same Machlokes says the Drogochover. Are all the mitzvahs one unit or they're separate? And he and Rabbi Yosef Engel are both saying this might be what's behind the debate of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Go back to number 3. This is a whopper of Rabbi Yosef Engel. Rabbi Yosef Engel says, okay, I'm going to say it outside. The Yerushalmi says that when the Yidden entered Israel in the 40th year with Yeshua, there was a problem with eating matzah. They could not take grain from Israel and make matzah because it's all chodosh. All the grains that had grown had not passed through the 16th day of Nisan. And if they're going to wait for that, it's too late already. So the Yerushalmi says, wait a second, let them take the forbidden grain and eat it. The mitzvahs aseh of eating matzah should be doicha, the lois aseh of eating chodosh. We have a general rule, aseh doicha lois aseh. And aseh pushes away a lois aseh. So the Yerushalmi says an incredible thing, that matzah is a weak mitzvah because it was given before Matan Torah. It's given in Parshas Boy. It's a mitzvah, the way Tosfos understands the Yerushalmi is it's a mitzvah l'ifnei adibur. A mitzvah that was given before and not repeated later is a weaker mitzvah. Now, how does that fit with what we're saying? Well, the Rambam would say that the Eibishter told Moshe and Har Sinai again, maybe eat mitzvah, but it wasn't written again in the Chumash. So it's a weak mitzvah. Chodosh was given in Parshas Emor, right? By the way, I saw there's an old minig that if somebody is not careful on Chodosh, they shouldn't get that aliyah in Parshas Emor that speaks about. And also on Sukkot we read it. There's a hakpada that if someone, so the Rebbe, years ago, the Rebbe once said, I don't know a person in Brooklyn that's careful about Chodosh. But then all the Hechsherim got them, things changed since then. Now everyone's, now you go on the airplanes, right? It's Yoshan. It's not Chol Yisrael, but it's Yoshan. It's Yoshan. Anyhow, one?
In the Chofs, I never heard.
Right. But Baruch Hashem now we become frumer over time, right? So, crazy Yerushalmi. A mitzvah that was said before is weaker than a mitzvah later. Very strange Yerushalmi. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, if you say the Torah began by Avram, like Rabbi Yochanan was given part by part, then it's not a weaker mitzvah. Nothing at 2448 was the completion, but it began years earlier. A mitzvah boy is not chopped liver. He says, There's a debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, one of the most famous debates. The Torah said if you have a kazayas of tray, if you eat it, you get malchus. What if you have a half a kazayas? Rabbi Yochanan says Chatzi Shiur is biblically a problem. Reish Lakish says Chatzi Shiur? Chatzi Shiur? Min Torah you're allowed to eat. Reish Lakish says less than the amount of punishment is also not prescribed biblically. Rabbinically, obviously you can't, but not Min Torah.
They do all the mitzvahs of the Dvarim, right, by Matan Torah, according to
That we mentioned in the Shiur in the past. The famous Rajba discusses when was Shema given, V'hoyim Shemaya given.
all the mitzvahs there.
Yeah, Yibum, right? They didn't know about Yibum. The whole story of Yehuda was a bit, right? We had a Shiur about it. No, it's a good question. There's a big discussion at the beginning of Dvarim. All the Mefarshim discussed all the mitzvahs in Dvarim where they said before, and Moshe repeated everything to the Jews before they went into Israel. But most mitzvahs don't get repeated in Dvarim. Out of the 613, most of them aren't repeated. Moshe repeated orally, didn't record it. Some mitzvahs that they knew before he recorded then, each one for a reason, not for now. So, the Kabbalists say, we know Rabbi Yochanan was a Gilgul of Yosef. Rabbi Yochanan says, I come from Yosef. He wasn't scared of Ayin Hara, right? Sat next to the mikveh. Reish Lakish, though, was a Gilgul of Yishmael. The Shamshon Extrapolating says, Yosef was a man of the future. Yosef told his brothers, you sold me, but it was really an act of just leading me to become a viceroy of Egypt. It was really a good act. Yosef looked towards the future. Yishmael, when the Eibishter judges Yishmael, the famous story, it was Ba'asher Husham, based on where he was in the present. So Rabbi Yochanan is worried about the future. He says you can't have the first half of a piece of chazer, but worried you might do the other half. Reish Lakish says we're not worried about the future, it's where you are now. Right now it's not the size. Anyhow, that's not Rabbi Yosef Engel's word. Rabbi Yosef Engel is much better word. Okay, he says like this. Do you know why they debate about Chatzi Shiur? Because they were both bothered by this Yerushalmi, by this question. When the Yidden went to Israel with Yeshua, why didn't they take the new grains and make matzah out of it? Let the mitzvah saseh of matzah push away the loy saseh of chodesh. So he says, Reish Lakish, as the Reish Lakish holds, Torah was given one fell swoop, which means the whole Torah was given 2448. So he could say that matzah is a weak mitzvah. It was given too early. It was given right before they stood at Mount Sinai. So he can go with that answer. But Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the Torah was given piece by piece, which according to Yosef Engel's theory says, it started with Avram, and Yaakov had Gid Hanashe, and it was added, then matzah is not chopped liver, it's just as good as chadash. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, why didn't they take the chadash and make matzah out of it? So he says, the Chidushei Harim says why. Because what if you eat a little bit more than the required amount, or a little bit less than the required amount? What if you're going to eat exactly a kazayas of matzah? Especially now that a kazayas, somehow kazayas became 5 matzahs, right? 5 of the thick matzahs. Thin matzahs, 15 to have a kazayas, right? Somehow it became matzah. So, no, how are you going to get an exact, here's all the people that are weighing their matzahs, they're measuring the volume. Says the Chidushei Harim, what if you don't eat the exact amount? If you drop less, you stop violating Chodesh.
More, you did it from action.
You eat a little bit more, then that little more. But wait, what's the problem though? Eating a little bit, if it's only rabbinic, it's not a problem. He quotes a Mabit who holds that in the times of Moshe and Yeshua, there were no rabbinic prohibitions. It started later. The Mabit in the Beis Elikim, our friend, the Mabit says, first 2 generations didn't need. All the rabbinic precautions came later when we started to deteriorate spiritually. Originally, the times of Moshe and Yeshua, it wasn't necessary. It
was the first time you do a mitzvah. Isn't it supposed to be done properly, like by Hanukkah?
Oh yeah, okay. This wasn't the first time. They matzah throughout the 40 years in the desert. Oh, Chadash. Okay. Yeah, I hear. Good point. Yeah, point taken. So.
Explaining them a bit.
So if Rabbi Yochanan holds that a Chatzi Shiur is rabbinic, he's up the creek without a paddle. Eat the matzah, because according to him, matzah is just as powerful as Chodesh, because Torah began way earlier. The asay doicha the lav, you might eat a little bit more, right? It's mutter, Because Rabbanim won't go there or anything. And if you eat a little bit less as well, what were you over? So you have nothing to lose. Must be, Rabbi Yochanan had to say Chatzi Shiur is biblical. Reish Lakish doesn't have to say that. Because he has the answer. The Torah was given in one fell swoop, in one shot, by Har Sinai. Matzah is a weak mitzvah. Rabbi Yochanan couldn't answer that. He had to say Chatzi Shiur is assur min Torah. Unbelievable. So he threads these two debates, one with the other. It's unbelievable. Join me in number 7. This is it's gold. In number 7 is gold. He says, there's a story in Chumash in Parshas Shlach. The Mekoshesh, the guy that gathers or whatever malacha he did, broke Shabbos and he was killed. And Rabbi Akiva in Masechta Shabbos identifies the Mekoshesh as Tzlofchad, who's only mentioned in Parshas Pinchas. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir tells Rabbi Akiva, who are you to reveal the identity of the guy? The Eibishter didn't disclose it. He covered up. There's Eintir, who are you? Why are you revealing the identity? So wait a second. Tosfos says that the Mekoshesh did what he did for a good reason. The Mekoshesh knew that after the story of the Meraglim, the Yidden said, we're not going to Israel, so we don't have to keep the Torah anymore. They thought that the whole thing was off. So the Mekoshesh broke Shabbos to show people that, Torah still means business. Halacha is still real. Which means he did it for a good reason. So according to that, Rabbi Akiva is saying, Faket, Slavchad, we know, died for whatever reason. He says, he was the Mekoshesh, he was a good guy. He was a good guy. But here's the problem, really? Is that true what Tosfos says? That Mekoshesh did it for a good reason? Then he didn't really break Shabbos, because in order to break Shabbos, you have to want the malacha for the purpose of the malacha itself. If you do something, but you need it for a different, not for the malacha, but for some other reason, biblically it's not a problem. So how Bechlal was the Mekoshesh killed? So the Marsha answers, famous Marsha says, listen, no one knows what's going on in his mind, right? The witnesses saw him break Shabbos. They warned him, they witnessed the breaking, Shabbos finished. Yeah, but wait a second. They didn't know what to do with the Mekoshesh. They knew that if you break Shabbos, Mechalel Mos Yumas, you get killed. They didn't know which way. So Moshe locks him up, says, Eibishter, what do I do with him? So Hashem says, stone him. If Hashem's getting involved, Hashem should say, no, he didn't really break Shabbos. So here's the thing. He said it's all based on a Maharal. The Maharal says that all 40 years the Yidden were in the desert, the heavens were open and the Eibishter would constantly teach new things. The idea of Torah, loy b'shamayim, Torah is not in heaven, started after that. During the 40 years of the desert, the Eibishter could make new mitzvahs, the Eibishter could intervene, Torah was still in heaven. It was only after we left the desert that changed. So accordingly, wait a second. If the channels are open to heaven and the Eibishter could intervene, so you don't have to say, well, the witnesses saw. No, you're allowed to bring heaven. Heaven can reveal that the Mekoshesh had good intentions. So once Moshe is saying, God, what do I do with him? Hashem should say, well, between me and you, do nothing. Because I know what his thoughts were. Yeah, but this is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva holds that on Har Sinai, the Eibishter gave the Klalim and the Pratim. According to Rabbi Akiva, the Torah was all given then at one shot. He doesn't hold with the Maharal that the Torah has stages and time and it covers a long period. He doesn't hold that all 40 years the heavens open. So Rabbi Akiva holds the Torah was given in one fell swoop on the 6th of Sivan. It was all given, Klalim Pratim. The heavens closed. Torah is now on earth. The Mekoshesh may have had good things in mind. The Eibishter can't intervene as far as... The Eibishter could tell Moshe Skilla, because Moshe didn't know which of the 4 deaths. But the Eibishter could not say what he had in mind. Torah is no longer in heaven. So Rabbi Akiva could say, when I say Mekoshesh is Slavcha, I'm doing Slavcha a favor. Because the Mekoshesh was a good guy. He did it for good reasons. He wanted to show that Torah mitzvah is still real. Why was he killed? That's a technicality. He had to go. Because Torah is no longer in heaven. Hashem couldn't reveal what was going on in his mind. The witnesses saw him break Shabbos, that's it. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he says, holds like Rabbi Yishmael, the Torah was given in stages. So then he'll hold like the Maharal, that all 40 years the heavens are open. Just like the Torah was given over from Avram till then. There's a long process, the heavens open. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says the Mekoshesh can't be tzlafchad. The Mekoshesh couldn't have done it for the sake of heaven. I'm sorry, that's what I meant. In other words, he's saying if tzlafchad is a Mekoshesh, you're doing him a disservice. The Mekoshesh could not have meant it for good reasons. Because if he did, he wouldn't have been killed. The Eibusher would reveal what went on in his mind. That's the debate of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira.
After Matan Torah?
Yeah.
But it wouldn't even the guy that agrees that it gave Megillah that Matan Torah was the completion and then the heavens closed?
No, he says that would go with the Maharal's theory that all 40 years. No, he says that the Maharal is a theory, all 40 years the heavens were open. New mitzvahs were given. Pesach Sheni was only given in the second year. So he says this idea that the heavens were open all 40 years. Look at number 8. He wants to thread it through a debate of Tanoim. How long before Yom Tov do you have to start learning about the halachas? That's what you think. That's what the rabbis say. Why? So look at number 8 to Gemara Pesachim, because Moshe Rabbeinu was standing at the first Pesach. This is during the second year after the Yidden left Egypt. They're still by Har Sinai, and there was Nisan, and a group of people told Moshe, we're Tameh, it's not fair, etc. So Moshe starts telling them on the 14th of Nisan about the 14th of Iyar, about Pesach Sheni. So you see from there, 30 days before you start preparing. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, come on. He was discussing Pesach Rishon, so he started talking about what's going to happen next month. But generally, you don't have to prepare a month before, 2 weeks before. What's his source? 2 weeks. What's his source? 2 weeks. Because he said, forget the second year. The first year, when the Yidden were leaving Egypt, they left in Nisan. On Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Moshe told them about that Korban Pesach, which was 14 days later. So you see, it's 2 weeks. So in number 9, Rabbi Yosef Engel quotes a Pnei Yeshua who says, you know what the debate is? The Pnei Yeshua says, the Chachamim will tell Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, why would you learn what happened in the first year? That was before the Torah was given. They left during Nisan, 15th of Nisan. Well, on 2 weeks before then, Moshe warned them about, or instructed them about the Korban Pesach. But later the Torah was given, new rules. So you have to look what happened the year after, in year number 2. So for Rabbi Yosef Engel, it's a beautiful explanation with Pnei Yeshua. What's Taka Pshat of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? He must hold like the theory that no, the Torah began before. The Torah began before. Now he says though, you can't prove for me the Torah began from Avram or from Yaakov. You could prove there that anything said in Parshas Bo is part of Matan Torah. I mentioned earlier, you could say, because it's Moshe. The Rambam writes in the commentary in Chulin, we don't do Bris Milah because Avram was told. We don't do Gid Hanashe because Yaakov was told. We do because God told Moshe on Mount Sinai. If the stress is Moshe, is the stress of the Rambam Har Sinai or Moshe? If it's Moshe, then Boy is fine. So Rabbi Yosef does say that after this. It could be that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel dafka hold, right. And no, he's saying Rabbi Shimon Gamliel lav dafka goes all the way back. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel will say the first year and second year are equal status.
So he's not saying the Rambam would go that far.
No, I'm saying that. Right. I'm just saying it could. The Rambam does say Har Sinai, right? So you can't just erase those. You can't erase what you don't like, right? Ben Gershon made a chayim about that. Fine. Come to number 10. In number 10, Rabbi Yosef Engel says, wait a second. We mentioned many halachas that you can't derive because they're sources from before Matan Torah, right? But there are many things you do. Right? We say Avelis not, but what about all the things you do? He says, wait a second. In number 10, he says, you know the famous Yerushalmi? You can't learn Avelis from what happened to Yaakov because you can't learn from before Matan Torah. Look in the 4th line of number 10. Muchach, you see from here, that Yerushalmi that says you can't learn Avelis from Yaakov and Yosef because it was before the Torah was given, obviously holds that the Torah didn't begin at that point. Fine. But what about all the other sources? He says, what about the Gemara that said if you're married for 10 years without kids, you got a divorce? Where do we learn that from? This week, Parshas Lech Lecha, Avram and Sarah. They went to Israel, it restarts the clock. How could you learn a halacha from there? That's a Gemara in Yavamis. I didn't mention that example before. And he has a couple. He says the fact that, and we mentioned before a number of examples. He says, you find one after the other examples of things we do, and we mentioned before a whole list, things you do learn from before Matan Torah. You know what he wants to say? Whether you could learn from before Matan Torah or not depends on his whole theory. All the sources that say you're allowed to learn from Avram or this and that, they all hold the Torah already began then. It's not before Matan Torah. The Gemara in Yavamis that says you're allowed to learn the din of 10 years from Avram, that opinion holds the Torah began from Avram. The Yerushalmi that says you can't learn Avelis because that's before the Torah was given from Yaakov and Yosef, that's the other opinion who holds that Torah wasn't given then. Earlier I gave you all the answers from the Kafta, the Ferach, the Shvusyan, different answers. Says Yosef Engel, nah, it's different opinions. There are those that hold you can learn everything because the Torah began. There are those that hold you can learn nothing. He's the only one that says this. All the other Mefarshim want to explain. Avelis you can't, but the other things you can. They go, no, it's Bechal two different opinions. It's Bechal two different opinions. Join me on number 11. He wants to talk about, in number 11, he wants to talk about the debate of Rabbi Yehuda Chacham about the Gid Hanashe. About the Gid Hanashe. And the Chachamim say Yaakov's kids were not warned, right? It only started by Har Sinai. That's where the Rambam is, he writes in Chulin, that's where he writes his whole idea that the mitzvahs are really all from Sinai. Fine, that's Chachamim. But Rabbi Yehuda says that Yaakov's kids couldn't eat Gid Hanashe. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda holds Matan Torah began from them. Maybe this is a debate. The debate of Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda about when did Gid Hanashe begin is this very debate. When was the beginning of the giving of the Torah? This very debate. Here, look, he said number 11 in the 5th line. V'ulam Rabbi Yehuda, who argues it could be he holds be'emes haschalof Matan Torah ma'Avram ukudvareinu hanal. Maybe this is a debate. Chacham says preposterous. Torah begins by when we stood by Har Sinai 244. Rabbi Yehuda's maybe holds no. It started much earlier.
How's that fit with the Gemara though?
Which Gemara?
The given answer of the Noyah. Huh?
No, number 1. No, Fakir, that Gemara says if you have a mitzvah written before Matan Torah and it never comes again, it only applies to Yidden. Which means you're allowed to learn from there. The Rambam just says the reason why you do it is...
You wouldn't even need to go there if the argument is based on it that the Torah was given all the way then, no?
The Varti is a mitzvah that was given earlier and not repeated again applies. That's only written once, so either to the Jew or the Yid, the Jew or the Goy. It makes more sense to the Jew. Right. So you're allowed to learn from there. There's an obligation, right. But the reason we do it is because Hashem told Moshe and Har Sinai. That's Matan Torah. That's Matan Torah. We don't do. You can glean information from there, but that's not why we do it. But maybe according to Rabbi Yehuda it is. But he says like this. This doesn't prove his whole theory. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda holds Matan Torah began by Yaakov, not by Avram. Maybe by Yaakov. And he has a theory based on a Gemara in Shabbos. He says, the Gemara says in Shabbos that Rabbi Yochanan says that after Chava with the snake, so the snake was with Chava, he put some zuama, some shmutz inside her, and it remained by all mankind except for the Jews. The Jews lost it when we stood by Har Sinai. Of course, the Zohar says we got it back when we served the Egel, but Chassidus says we didn't get the full dose back. We still have some of the benefit that we got when we stood by Mount Sinai.
They don't have it back. They'll say the baby is already mine. That's right.
This is part of the reason why there's a taiva. It's a very strange medrash that when the brothers came to rescue Dinah, Medrash Rabbah, when they came to rescue Dinah from Shechem, she didn't want to live. So simply she said, who's going to want to marry me? I've been violated. The Medrash says, no. Once she was with a guy, she wouldn't get that same tainug by a Yid. There's a certain allure. And the explanation is because the zuama, some of that shmutz from the snake remains by them. We were purified. Okay, fine. Okay, whatever. So, but the Gemara says in Shabbos, that's Rabbi Yochanan, that the Jews lost it by Har Sinai. Rabbi Abba Barkana argues and says, no, we lost it already by the time of Yaakovs. When Avram gave birth to Yishmael, Yitzchak to Esav, Yaakov was pure with all of his children. That's when the Shmutz left. So he says, what's the debate? If the Shmutz left by Har Sinai, that might resemble the fact that's when Torah was given. If the Shmutz left by Yankov, it could be that's when the Torah was given. So Rabbi Yehuda might hold that it happens. Rabbi Yochanan says the Shmutz left by Har Sinai, and he's the guy before that held Megillah, right? So it doesn't all have to fit together. They're all possibilities. But what is entertaining over here is even if Matan Torah began earlier, it could be began in Parshas Boy. Right. It could be it began by Yaakov, could be began by Avram. Now, if it begins by Avram, when did it begin? By the bris milah or earlier? So number 12, he says like this. Look at number 12. He says, Kvar danti le'el, I already discussed earlier in my fourth ois, that the beginning of Matan Torah was in the times of Avram. The completion was on Har Sinai. And it's mamish, those are the words of the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim. But he says, Niskarti, I realize it's a clear unclus in this week's parsha. It says the nefesh asher assur b'chorin. Avram and Sarah have the souls they made in Chorin. The shabidu la'iraisa, that they shabidu subjugate, okay, to the Torah. How could you subjugate someone to something which doesn't yet exist? You want to take upon yourself to keep Torah's one thing. You can't be meshubed. You can't be subjugated to a force that doesn't yet exist. Umuchach, that Torah existed. Now, how did Torah exist then? How old was Avram when es hanefesh asher assur b'choron, when he had these souls with him? So in this week's parsha, if you read the simple psukim, it seems Avram was 75 when he left Choron, and that's when Hashem spoke to him for the first time, and he said, Lech lecha, etc. However, we know the Eibishter spoke to Avram before.
When he was 3.
We know at least when he was 70, Hashem spoke to him, because by the bris bein Absalom later in the parsha, right? Rashi writes in Parshas Boy, and we had a whole shir about this once, that was 430 years before the Yidden left Egypt. Avram was 70. So Tosfos, everybody asks, so the parsha is out of order, Taka? Avram was in Israel once before when he was 70. He had left. He comes back again when he's 75. So you see that the beginning of Lech Lecha is not so clear. It says it's hanefesh asher assur b'choron. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says, you know when that happened? Says the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, the world will last for 6,000 years. 2,000 years of toyu, of chaos. 2,000 years of Torah. 2,000 years of Yemos HaMashiach. By the RAB Engel, who we spoke with all the discussion we had Thursday night, we didn't speak about the fact that he kocht big in Mashiach. He wrote a trilogy all about Mashiach, and one of his sforim begins a whole discussion about what does this mean that the last group of 2,000 years are days of Mashiach. But what does it mean the middle are Torah? For 2,000 years there was Torah. The Torah was only given in 2448. How could you say that there were 2,000 years of Torah? Like this is like the biggest proof that the Torah began before. I mean, Pshut Shal Mikra. How do you read? Hold on before you slug it up. It sounds good, right? 450 years after. But wait a second. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah wants to know, if you count the years of all of Avram's Zaydas from the end of Bereshis and Noach, you can count that Avram was born in the year 1948 from creation. He was 52 when the year 2000 began. So the Gemara says, that's when Torah began? Says the Gemara, yeah. Es hanefesh asher assur b'choron, when he was 52. And that's when Torah began. So Yosef Engel. That means Torah began when he was 52. That's when Hashem said Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha, and when it says he was 75 of Choron, are two different stories. Lech Lecha was the first transmission of Torah. That's his theory. Whatever Hashem told Noach was prophecy. And later Moshe put in the Torah, fine. But the beginning of the revelation of Torah to the world was when Avram was 52, the year 2000. Because 2,000 to 4,000 years of Torah. Lech Lecha was the first thing. Look what he says in number 12. In the 5th line, V'hainu al karchach, from the first words that Hashem told Avram, Lech Lecha, Kvar hayezeh galus elikis, that was the godly revelation, and the dibur was Torah. Not like when Hashem spoke to Noach, that was just prophecy, it was actual Torah. From then Torah began. clear unclus. How could you be subjugated when it doesn't exist? And the Gemara, and he said it's clear in Avodah Zarah that Tanat Velio, the world's 6,000 years, 2,000 Torah, 2,000 Torah, and the Gemara says, when did the Torah begin? The Matan Torah was much later. And the Gemara answers, it's HaNefesh Asher Assur. And Rashi there says, because Avram subjugated them to Torah. Umavur, it's clear that from that point the Torah began, from the year 2000. From the time that Avram subjugated those people to Torah, it already existed. And it's clearly like what I told you before. But then he writes in brackets that he did quote from some Midrashim that Avram's Geirus was only from the Bris Milah. The Ramban famously holds Avram had the halachic identity of a Jew, but only from his bris, that he was 99. If Avram's halachic identity of a Jew starts at 99, could the Torah have begun earlier?
Yeah.
Could you say that Torah was given to Cohen?
No, it wasn't a Cohen.
Oh, but the Bris Karov, he had the neshama of the Yid, but the halachic identity of a Jew was later. Good, you know what? Good. I'm going to write that on the footnote. I'm going to write the footnotes in my sefer over here. So he says, fine. He said, no, maybe it's a debate. Maybe some Midrashim hold it began when he was a bris. But from here, from the Gemara and Avodah Zarah and from Unclus, it's clear, from 52 he was already a Jew. He says no, it can't be that the Torah began to be given to a non-Jew. It has to be he was a Jew. He doesn't go with his brisker Rav. You could have the identity of a Jew, but not the halachic identity. It comes together. So he wants to say that it could be Avram was halachically a Jew by 52. Now the truth is, I gave a shiur a while ago, it could be Avram and halachic identity earlier than that, but we'll leave it over here. At the end of all these things, he always says, Bossi rak lohor. I just came to point this out. I came to put some ideas on the table. Take it.
No, but you
One?
have to,
What do you have to say bris is what defines Avram as a yid? Like, why is that?
Because every Geirus comes through a bris.
But he didn't. There was no Indian of bris, no mitzvah of bris till 99. So he
Right.
was a yid already before, and then here's a new parameter.
you know,
That would be an argument to say he became
But
earlier.
from
Right,
Noah,
right,
we have
right.
to
But you have
make
to have a
a
raya he became earlier. This is a raya. Right.
but we have to make a
Shekayach.